First and foremost, thank you so much for joining us on this Tuesday afternoon, a chilly Tuesday afternoon at that. My name is Tyler Ford. I am Vice President of External Partnerships at tnAchieves, overseeing our mentor program. Have been lucky to do so for the past 4 years, I guess it is now, and really excited today to be joining you on this webinar to talk a little bit about kicking off your time with students here in 2025. Now, before I go through housekeeping things, before I jump into content, I do want to provide an opportunity for my colleague Baylor to introduce herself as well as we get things kicked off.
Hi, everyone. I am the Outreach Manager at tnAchieves. I've been with the organization for about 5 years now, but I've been in this role for about 2 years, working with mentors and with the community at large.
Yeah, we're excited to have Baylor on today, and we're excited to have so many of you on with us today. Baylor is going to be reaching out to you, providing resources for you throughout your time as a mentor. So we've got her on here today to help address questions, help make sure that we deal with those frequently asked questions, and make sure that you leave here today feeling ready to hit the ground running with students. Before I do go into really the important content of today's meeting, I want to go through a few quick housekeeping things. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, so if you do have to hop out early, if you miss a part, just know that in next week's Monday email, you'll be receiving a copy of this webinar that you can go back and rewatch. We'll also be hosting this same webinar several times throughout January, so if you want to rejoin for any reason, you can certainly do that. You'll also notice that you're muted during today's webinar. And that is just done for message clarity so we can get through today's content. Of course, if you do have questions, you've got an opportunity to ask those questions. We've got both a chat section and a Q&A box. Baylor is going to be monitoring that through the duration of today's meeting to make sure that we get those questions answered, that we address those, and she'll hop in here at the end so we can go through some of those frequently asked questions. But really today, I want to spend some time covering three really important next steps for you as a mentor. First and foremost, we're going to talk next steps. What does it look like to proceed through January through February with your tnAchieves students and do so successfully? I'm going to address some frequently asked questions. Now, these are questions that we've seen year in and year out at this stage of the mentor program that hopefully can add some clarity for you as a mentor as you get started. And then finally, I'm going to highlight some mentor resources. I'll say at the top that I'm about to talk through a lot of information related to the mentor program. I'm about to talk through a lot of tips, a lot of tricks to ensure you're successful. But one thing I hope you know is that throughout your time as a mentor, we are going to work really tirelessly to surround you with resources, right? Because we believe and we feel it's important that you are supported in the same way our students are, because you really, truly are one of the greatest assets we have in terms of making sure students are successful and making sure students are supported in the college going process. So again, before we jump into this, I do want to stress we really, really appreciate you for completing your mentor requirements, for registering in 2025, and for making this commitment to serving students. Because we see time and again that for the students who raise their hand and ask for mentor support, your encouragement, your support, and the personal connection that you establish really, truly is irreplaceable. It's certainly irreplaceable when you consider the scale that we work at, 60,000 seniors on an annual basis. Without your support as a mentor, we can't provide individual personal support for those students. So really grateful to you for serving as a mentor, and really excited as well for getting things kicked off here today. So the first thing that I want to talk about is next steps, what you need to be doing as a mentor in order to find success as a mentor. So at this point, you all have received your student list. That student list likely arrived to you either at the very end of December or last week in January. And that student list is going to contain a couple of really important pieces of information on your student: their name, their phone number, their email address. It's going to include their parents' contact information as well. And it's also going to contain their county and high school as well. You will notice there is some information listed, or excuse me, missing from that list, including student school preference. And that's just because we don't yet have that information on your students. We will load it in as soon as it becomes available. But now that you've gotten that student list, now that you're paired to mentees, the next step you can take is establishing consistent, reliable communication with your students. And we always encourage a bi-weekly communication cadence. And the reason we do that is, to be totally candid, we have found that to be just the right amount of communication for high school seniors, right? It's not too much to where it feels overbearing or overwhelming, but it's not too little to where the student thinks, it's been a while since I've heard from my mentor or something like that. It's just the right amount of communication to ensure that a student knows someone out there in their community has their back, and someone out there in their community will answer their questions as they come about in the college going process. What you can expect is that once we get into February and once we get all of our mentors paired, we're going to start sharing our weekly Monday email on a really consistent basis. And in that Monday email, there's going to be a communication template. That's something you can use either via text message, you can use via email, but either way, we encourage you to take that template, make it your own a little bit, add a personal touch to it, but then send it out to your students. I think the most important thing in establishing a successful mentor-mentee relationship is this biweekly communication cadence. It is the consistency with which you reach out to your students. I would add to reach out to their parents as well. What you're likely to find is that when you stay in consistent contact with their parents, what you're really doing too is ensuring that if the parents have questions, they reach out to you as well. Maybe if you're having trouble getting in contact with your students, that they can help to nudge their students along as well. At the end of the day, though, I think this is one of the most important pieces. It's the consistency, it's the biweekly outreach, and it's establishing that open line of communication to your Tennessee Achieves students. The final thing I'll note here, don't become discouraged if your students don't respond to every biweekly message that you send. What we know is 17 and 18-year-olds can at times be hard to reach. They can be slow to respond. What we hear oftentimes from our students is that they don't think to respond to a mentor message until they're up against an obstacle, until they're facing a challenge. And so what we ask you to do is send your biweekly communication to every student every time, because even if they haven't responded in a few weeks, even if you haven't heard an update, what we know is when the student does need help, when they are up against an obstacle, they're going to remember that you've been reaching out to them, and they're going to think to make that connection. I would add, too, that particularly as we are jumping off in terms of a next step, one of the best things you can do here in January is simply get to know your mentees, right? As you get started, it is important to build a rapport with your students. Use this time to learn more about their goals, hobbies, and interests. It really is that easy. I think that in the case of many of our students, they may only want to talk next steps and requirements for Tennessee Promise. But for so many of the students who are raising their hand and asking for mentor support, it's important to keep in mind that these students may have never had someone in their community step into their life and say, hey, I'm here to help. I believe in you, and I want this college journey to be successful for you. And for that reason, it is important to get to know the student as a whole. Get to know their career goals, get to know what activities they do in school, what gets them excited about continuing their education, and get to know the student on a personal level. Because when you do that, you open doors to more meaningful conversations about college requirements, college goals, and where a student plans to go after high school. As a final next step too, I would add that you want to encourage your students, especially at this time, to start exploring college options. For many of our most at-risk students, those first-generation low-income college students, they may be only just now starting to look at their college options. So whether that's a technical school, whether that's a community college, perhaps it is a four-year institution, they are just now starting to poke around those college websites to figure out which is the best fit for them. And in the cases of some students, they may need a bit of a nudge to start taking that step. So as you have these initial conversations with your students, as you send these initial messages, one of the best action items that you can work with your students on is a simple question like, hey, have you started looking at your college options yet? What questions do you have? And you're likely to find that they may have some of those questions. Again, don't be discouraged if they don't respond right away and don't have those questions right away. But I would say that particularly as they are just getting paired with their volunteer mentor, one of the most important things that you can talk to your students about is the college options, and it is figuring out what the best fit institution is for them. If your students do have any questions, if they do have concerns with their college options that you don't quite feel qualified to answer, know that you can always put them in touch with a member of our team, whether it's Baylor, whether it's myself, and we'll make sure to get those questions answered. As you will see in our next slide, there is a lot to come in terms of deadlines and requirements. Now, I want to highlight these things here, but I want you to know that there is not necessarily immediate action required for you on these action items. At the end of the day, in your weekly Monday email, which we'll share more on here in just a moment, we're going to provide you with information about each of these requirements as they become relevant. We're going to provide you with trainings and resources to ensure you know more about these requirements. But I do, as we get things started here for Mentors in 2025, want to flag these things so you know they are upcoming and you know that your students may ask questions, but at the bare minimum, need to start taking these into account as they get ready for the rest of their spring semester. So when we talk about the key requirements that you as a mentor are going to work towards with your students, one of the first ones is going to be filing the 2025-2026 FAFSA. And students have to do that by April 15th, 2025, in order to stay eligible for Tennessee Promise. Now, the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. This is a critical step for any student going to college, whether they are thinking of using Tennessee Promise or not thinking of using Tennessee Promise, because at the end of the day, this is how they qualify for any forms of federal or state scholarship aid. And so in the next few months, we will offer a FAFSA training webinar for you as mentors so that you can ensure you're providing meaningful, resourceful guidance for your students in this space. But one thing I would caution, or one thing I would say as we talk about this requirement, is that it is never our expectation for you as a mentor that you hold your student's hand through the FAFSA filing process. Quite frankly, even that you sit down and file the FAFSA directly alongside your students. What I will say here is the FAFSA is, in many cases, kind of a longer step for the students to complete. It requires financial information. It requires tax information for both the students and their parents. It may be information that the student just isn't comfortable sharing. And honestly, it may be information that you as a mentor just aren't comfortable getting into with your students. And we certainly don't expect you to do so. The best thing you can do as a mentor in the FAFSA filing space is simply say to your students, hey, let's find FAFSA filing resources for you, and then connect them to our team, connect them to their school counselor, connect them to a local college, all of whom have teams and resources standing by to sit down and get into that really nitty-gritty FAFSA filing information with your students. But certainly know that this is a mandatory Tennessee Promise requirement coming up for your students on April 15th, and your students can be on the lookout for more information from us on this requirement, and you can as well as we get into the FAFSA filing season here in February and March. The next thing is going to be completing and submitting 8 hours of community service. Now, when we talk about upcoming next steps for your students and action items, this one really does have a fairly long lead time, about 6 months still to complete and submit those 8 hours of community service by July 1st. But know that your students can begin completing those hours now. I think this is, without a doubt, one of the best spaces you can plug in as a mentor. As you hear of local volunteer needs, as you maybe host volunteer opportunities yourself, you're not required to, but you're certainly welcome to. Let your students know, get them plugged into those volunteer opportunities because your students are likely to reach out to you when they're looking for volunteer needs. And certainly, as you become aware of those, share them with your students so they can complete this mandatory requirement and remain in good standing for the Tennessee Promise Scholarship. The final thing that I want to mention here is enrolling as a full-time student. In order to stay eligible for Tennessee Promise, students have to start this fall. They can't take a gap year. They can't take a semester off. They've got to start right away. And so this is where, and I'll certainly talk more about this as we get further into the spring, as we approach the summer. But I want to stress this when we talk about getting started as a mentor, because what I have always found is your work as a volunteer becomes the most important in the summer months. When students walk out the door of their high school in May and enter into that 2 to 3 month period where they haven't quite started college yet, and they're, making summer plans, they're starting their summer job. Because when you consider your role as a mentor, when you consider the student experience, students are likely hearing from a counselor while they're at school. They may be hearing from a teacher, a friend who is nudging them and encouraging them to take action on key college going requirements. However, once they graduate, once they go home and start their summer, they aren't hearing from those people on a daily basis anymore. They're continuing to hear from Tennessee Achieves, but other than that, they may not be interacting personally with someone on college action items. That's where your work as a mentor finds its biggest value. It's you're continuing to reach out to them through June, July, and August every other week, encouraging them on college action items, on Tennessee Promise requirements. You're also reaching out and encouraging them to stay goal focused. A lot of students get into the summer, they start making money on their summer job. They may think, hey, I'm good here. I don't actually need to go to college. With their Tennessee Achieves mentor continuing to nudge them, continuing to encourage them to buy textbooks and register for classes, complete community service, they have that college champion in their corner that is ensuring that their goal of going to college that they graduated with stays with them through the summer months and leads to them walking in the door of a post-secondary institution next fall. So all of these requirements are important. But I want you to know that if you stay up to date with your Mentor Monday emails, if you stay up to date with the webinars we're going to continue to offer over the next 10 months, the nitty-gritty information, the need-to-know details that relate to each of these requirements, and more key college-going action items will really become clear and will really become accessible to you as a mentor. So stay tuned for more on these requirements, but I always like to flag these just so you know what's upcoming as you get started with students. Baylor, before I jump into these, do we have any common questions or anything that I should address before we go into our other frequently asked questions?
Yeah, so one common question in the chat was about the student portal, Tyler. If you
Yep.
could speak on that a little bit, that would be great.
Yeah, that's a great question. The student portal, the Tennessee Achieves Connect portal, as many of you know it by, that is something that's upcoming. We will release it to all mentors once we have finished our mandatory meeting season, essentially. And we just do that because we'll have to get it updated, pull in the new data for the new year. We don't quite have it in terms of FAFSA filing information. So quite frankly, there's nothing additional beyond your initial student list that we can put in there quite yet. But I would be on the lookout for that in mid-February. We'll get that to you so you can start checking in on student FAFSA filing status, community service status, as well as the most up-to-date contact information we've got for your students.
And if you need your student list resent to you, just reach out to me. My email is baylor@tnAchieves.org, and I can go ahead and send you that student list once again.
Yeah, that's a great flag, Baylor. I'll add too, for any new mentors who may be on the line, when we talk about the portal, that is essentially an online portal, for lack of a better word, where mentors can see real-time updates on where their students stand for some of these requirements, both the FAFSA, community service hours submitted, and we can also, for community colleges across the state, pull in whether or not they've applied and registered for classes. So it's real time. When you log in, you see what we have on your students, which just makes it easier for you to check in and provide real-time updates to your students. Any other questions, Baylor?
We had a few questions about students taking summer classes, if they can utilize Tennessee Promise. Um, so if you could speak on that a little bit, that would be great as well.
Yeah, absolutely. What I would encourage you, just as a rule of thumb, when it comes to summer classes, if you have a student that wants to pursue this path, have them reach out to our team. There's recently been some policy changes around summer classes that do allow students to take summer classes using the Tennessee Promise Scholarship. But there's some nuances, quite frankly, to that policy. So if you've got a student considering that path, have them reach out to us. We'll check in on what they plan to do and make sure we get them the best guidance possible.
I think that's all the questions from the Q&A portion.
All right, perfect. Well, we'll keep going with some frequently asked questions and see if that spurs more. Great questions. So what I want to do now is, as I said at the onset, talk through some of the most common questions we see as we're getting kicked off, as you are starting your experience as a mentor. And hopefully, whether or not you have reached out to your students yet or not, you find this to be helpful and it provides a little bit of clarity on where you go from here. The first question that we see is one of the most popular questions without a doubt, and that's what's the best way to communicate with students? How can I remain in consistent contact with my students? I'm going to take the second part of this question first. We talked about biweekly outreach already. That is the best way to get in consistent contact with your students. Not to belabor the point, but I think that when you reach out every other week and when you establish that consistent cadence, it sets expectations for your students. It lets them know that no matter what, you're going to keep reaching out. And I would stress again that we ask, and one thing we do expect of mentors is that you reach out to each of your assigned students every single time. Because while you may find that one week they don't respond, or maybe 1 month they don't respond, what you do when you reach out consistently every other week is you keep the door open so that when the student does have an obstacle, when they do need help, they know they can turn to you. I would add here that consistent contact relies on, I think, the mentor being willing to ask direct questions to students. If you send open-ended conversation starters, a lot of times students just don't know what to do with that. They don't. The 17 and 18-year-olds will not come as a surprise. They're not always the best communicators on the planet. And so the more direct the question, the better, the more likely you are to get a response. So if you can avoid really long messages, try to keep them short, try to keep them brief, and try to keep them really focused on whatever the question at hand is, the task at hand is. In terms of the best way to communicate with students, it is text messaging. I've been in this role now for 4 years. I've been doing this work for 6. That has not changed. I do think picking up the phone, having a FaceTime call post-COVID is something students may be a little bit more inclined to do. But without a doubt, to establish consistent contact, try to avoid email. I think you can email parents. I think you can send an email to your students, but you have to be willing to pick up the phone and text them, hey, I just sent you an email. Can you go check for it? It's just the way of communication students are most likely to be familiar with, are most likely to be comfortable with. So text messaging is going to be your best path forward in terms of communication. Our next question is, should I be meeting in person with my students? If so, what advice do you have for doing so? My answer here would be yes. You've attended your in-person meeting or maybe watched a make-up webinar, and now it is about the work of getting to know your students and building a relationship with them. While it is not a requirement to meet with your students in person, we do encourage you to try to do so if at all possible. As a rule, we always ask that you meet them in a public place, so coffee shop, restaurant, public library. You can reach out to our team too, and we can work to try to set up a lunch meeting at the school on your behalf. So you have options in this space, but I think that if you are able to, even one time in these next few months, sit down and have an in-person conversation with your students, you are much more likely to find success in June and July when your students are no longer in school. You may find too that it goes great and you have ongoing meetings with your students, or even if they're more likely to pick up the phone, that's a win. So yes, if you can, definitely try to meet in person. I think the best tips that I have for doing so are be direct with your students. I wouldn't wait to make this invitation. I would reach out to your students now and say, hey, I'm so excited to work with you. Thanks for asking for a mentor. Do you want to meet at Starbucks next Wednesday? Or what's a time that works well for you? At the end of the day, you are the adult in the mentor-mentee relationship. I would not wait for the students to come to you and say, "Hey, would you be willing to meet? Hey, are you interested in a conversation?" Put the ball in their court, send me an invitation, make clear you would love to meet. Because what we have found, particularly since we have shifted to this opt-in mentor format, is that students are much more willing to have these in-person meetings, much more willing to have these conversations. You got to keep in mind, these students have asked for your help. They have indicated that mentorship matters to them. And so I think that when you are direct, when you reach out early to set up these conversations, you're likely to find, more likely to find, rather, that they're willing and able to meet. Before we move on from this one, I'll stress too, don't be discouraged if your students do not want to meet in person. I would try to find a middle ground, whether it's a 10-minute phone call, whether it's a Zoom call at some point, maybe it's a group meeting. Some students may still be a little bit uncertain about meeting in person, and that's okay. If they're responding to your text messages, if they are leveraging another form of meeting, that's totally okay. I think any version where the student and mentor are in contact working together is a win for you. It's a win for the state, and it's a win for that student. Should I talk about more than just college and career goals with my students? Yes. Always keep these conversations to kind of common hobbies, interests, sports, music, movies, whatever it may be. But one thing we have heard from mentors and students in the past is that these relationships are at their best when mentors have conversations like, "Hey, what activities are you involved in at school? What are some of your interests outside of school?" You may not find that you have too much in common, but also we've had mentors before where they share a lot of musical interests with their students. They share a common hobby or a common sports team. Even if you can find that one common interest, whether it's the Tennessee Volunteers or University of Memphis basketball team, whatever it may be, it's something that you can build a relationship with your students on that goes beyond the processes of going to college, that goes beyond their career goals. And I think in order to build an effective mentor-mentee relationship, you need those things. So do not be afraid to have those conversations that go beyond just the processes and the steps we lay out. Again, I think while it may not always work out that you have a lot of those shared interests, I do think that if you can find one or two of them, you're more likely to find success as a mentor, and you're more likely to have ongoing conversations throughout the spring, summer, and into the fall. Next one is, how is success defined for a Tennessee Achieves mentor? Do all of my students need to use Tennessee Promise? I want to stress here that while you may be getting a list of 2 students, 3 students, some mentors will have 5 students, that does not mean that we expect that all of your assigned students pursue the Tennessee Promise Scholarship. We assign these students to you as a mentor. We run the mentor program, not just to ensure that every single student goes to a community or technical college. Of course, we want to help students access Tennessee Promise. We want to make sure students stay eligible for Tennessee Promise. But it is not our expectation that every single student is going to choose this path. You may find that some of your students choose to go to a 4-year institution, maybe go out of state, maybe enlist in the military. Whatever it may be, our goal for the mentor program is that students have a plan for after high school, have a post-secondary plan. And whether you're helping a student to start at UT Chattanooga, whether you're helping a student to start at University of Western Kentucky, we want to help students pursue that path, and we want to make sure that students have that support. So no, all of your students do not need to use Tennessee Promise. Again, we want to help students who want to use Tennessee Promise access the scholarship, of course, but do not be discouraged or do not feel like you have not accomplished your goal if some of your students do something else after high school. And, I think that's how we define success for a Tennessee Achieves mentor. Even if you get just one student out the door of high school and into Columbia State Community College next fall or into University of Tennessee Martin, you've moved the needle for that student, for the community, for that student's family who particularly if they're a first generation college student, may see for the very first time that college is within reach. So this is not a program, this is not a role where we expect you to have 100% of your students responding to 100% of your messages, all of whom go on to access college. We hope for the best. We hope that happens, but don't become discouraged if it doesn't. Every single student, even if it's just one that you get through this program and in the door of a college next fall, represents a win for our program and a win for you as a mentor. And I'll stress again, I think consistency and communication matters. I think persistence matters, but don't let your success be defined by the number of students that are not responding. Even if it's just one student in consistent contact, even if it's just two students, that's the student that we're making the biggest difference for. And that's the student that we're so grateful to you for serving in this role and for stepping up to serve as a guide for students. Always, if you have questions in this space, particularly, feel free to reach out to us. We want to help. We want to make sure you feel supported, and we want to make sure you know what a significant impact you're making. What we see in the data is that when students work with mentors, they fulfill these requirements at higher rates. They stay on the track towards college at higher rates. So know that this program makes a difference. Your work as a mentor makes a difference. We're really grateful to you for serving as a mentor in 2025. Before we take additional questions, I do want to highlight we've got a lot of additional resources available to you. One of the things that's really important to us as a team is that we not overwhelm you on the front end with process, with details, with FAQs that aren't necessarily relevant for 6 to 7 months. And so we provide these resources to you on a weekly basis in some cases, so that as these college-going and Tennessee Promise requirements become relevant, you've got the information available to you. And so I would encourage every mentor to stay up to date with these resources. Really importantly, monitor your email for these additional resources as we send them, because we're going to ensure that as the FAFSA really comes into focus for the students, you've got information on how to help your students FAFSA file. As community service becomes really relevant, you've got a webinar on how to help students complete community service. So stay up to date. And if you ever feel like you aren't hearing from us, let us know, because we want to make sure to get that figured out. We want to make sure to get your email up to date. So a couple of resources that I'll highlight, those Monday emails every single week. We're going to send you an email with an action item, some information on how you can support your students, serve as a successful mentor in that given week, as well as a template that you can share with your students, making communicating with them really, really easy. You've also got your mentor handbook. That handbook serves as a pretty comprehensive guide to the program and some of these requirements that I've talked about. I would add to it is essentially a near match to the student handbook, which we do intentionally. That way, if your student reaches out and says, hey, I'm on page 7 of my student handbook, you can also turn to page 7, see what they're looking at, and make sure to provide a clear answer for your students. So know that handbook is a really outstanding resource for you as a mentor. Monthly webinars. Starting now through the end of your time as a mentor, we are going to host a training or a session each month to discuss a piece of the Tennessee Achieves program, discuss an upcoming requirement, and ensure you have the information you need to be successful in fulfilling that requirement and supporting your students in fulfilling that requirement. And of course, all of these webinars will be recorded and we will distribute them after the fact. So these aren't required. You don't need to be on live, but we offer these as kind of ongoing education, ongoing trainings for all mentors. So be on the lookout for those each month as we share them out in the Monday emails. We host mentor hours sessions. I've seen a couple names on already who have joined us for some of these sessions in the past, but these are essentially open office hours style sessions where Baylor or myself will hop in a Zoom room and quite literally just wait for other mentors to join us. It's an opportunity to ask questions to our team. It's an opportunity to hear from other mentors what best practices they've found, obstacles they've faced, and kind of get to know other mentors and some of the opportunities that exist in building that network. So we encourage you to join us for one of those sessions. Again, not required, optional, but these are some of my favorite things that we've implemented post-COVID, because it's an opportunity to connect with other mentors across the state, connect with our team, and have a face-to-face conversation. This is something that we will share the schedule for in that Monday email. So we'll start these up here within the next few weeks. Again, monitor your Monday email because we'll post the weekly schedule for mentor hours there. Finally, the Tennessee Achieves staff. I'm going to share my contact information here in just a moment, but we are here to help you. I said it earlier, but mentors truly are, I think, one of our greatest assets in supporting students, if not our greatest asset, specifically in the transition from high school to college. And so if you ever feel like you don't know the answer to a student question, you're not quite sure what to do, get in touch with Baylor, get in touch with myself, and we will dig in and make sure you feel supported. We do not expect any mentor to have all the answers in the college going process. That would be, frankly, an unfair expectation to have. So instead, always feel like you can reach out to us and we'll make sure to get you the answer. We'll make sure that your student is supported and that you're in a good spot. I've just spent a lot of time talking about the mentor program, about next steps, and about requirements. But I want to take a moment before we wrap up and before I take a few final questions to remind everyone on the call that mentorship is a role that exists for three reasons. First of all, because we see that when students have their community in their corner, a community champion, they thrive. We ask you as a mentor to serve in three really basic roles for your students: task manager, resource, and encourager. Task manager, because there are those key deadlines we talked about and we'll continue to talk about over the course of the next year. High school seniors, 17 and 18-year-olds, not always the most proactive group of humans on the planet. We ask you as a mentor to be that task manager, to nudge your students to be proactive and to think ahead as it relates to some of these key requirements. We ask you to serve as a resource for your students. I think a lot of times students are nervous to reach out to their college. They're nervous to reach out to, maybe even someone on our team for help because they don't want to feel like they're the only person with that question. Mentors establish a level of trust with their students where they say, hey, I'm here to help you. There's no question that's silly. There's no question that's dumb. Reach out and we're going to get it taken care of. You serve as that trusted resource for your students to help them navigate the college process. And like I said a moment ago, if it ever does get tricky, if you do need additional help, you can reach out to our team. Being a resource really is just as much having answers for your students as it is a willingness to say, hey, I actually don't know what to do here. Let's talk to Baylor. Let's talk to Tyler and get this figured out. Finally, there's an encourager. I saved this one for last because I believe, really truly believe that this is the most important role that you serve. For so many of our students, they have never pictured themselves in a college classroom before. They have never considered this to be a viable path for them. And we're sharing with them that they can go to college tuition and mandatory fee-free. They've got that opportunity at their fingertips. They've just got to complete a few requirements, complete a few key steps to do so. With a personal mentor in their corner, with a community champion, they've got someone who's saying, we're going to do this. I believe in you, and I'm going to be there every step of the way. And the power and the validation for a student that comes when you as a mentor step into their corner and take that champion role is really, really meaningful. And it's ultimately the piece that Tennessee Achieves can absolutely never replace. Like we've said, Tennessee Achieves is going to be in touch with your students as well. We're going to be there to help answer your questions. All of those things, those reminders, those questions, it comes better when it's coming from a personal mentor, from a Tennessee Achieves mentor like yourself. The piece that truly I feel is irreplaceable is the encouragement that you offer to your students, the support you provide them, and the reassurance that comes from knowing someone's in their corner when they need a little bit of help in this process. And so I'll reiterate it one more time. We really, truly do appreciate you for serving in these three roles, for stepping in and supporting students. And now that you've got your student list, we appreciate you as well for hopefully having already reached out to your students and made that initial introduction and started the work to get to know them. This is one of my favorite times here at Tennessee Achieves because it's the mentor program getting underway. We get to see all the hard work around recruitment, all the hard work around relationship building pay off as we get you paired to students. So excited to be getting things started. Hope you are as well, and really grateful for your time here today. Before we wrap up, I would love to know, Baylor, if we've got any other kind of common questions that have popped up or if there's anything we can address before we wrap up.
Yeah, one common question that we've had come up is if a mentor reaches out to their students and their parents and they don't hear response, what is the mentor's next step?
I would try a couple times. I mean, I think we're still really early, and so specifically if you got your list pre-holiday, uh, holiday season, keep trying for a couple more weeks. I think a lot of schools are still getting back into session. A lot of students are kind of refocusing around their goals for spring and for college. So try a couple times, follow up on your message and say, hey, can you respond letting me know you got this? Hey, just trying to get in touch. Let us know here if I would say within about 2 weeks, if you're still having trouble getting in contact with them. We can always nudge the student as well and say, hey, your mentor so-and-so is trying to reach out. Go ahead and respond to them, that sort of thing.
I also always suggest that mentors continue to reach out because you never know when a student's going to have a question. They might have a question 4 or 5 months down the line and they don't know who to turn to, but they'll remember that you send them a text every 2 weeks. And so they'll reach out to you. So even if you go a couple months with no luck, those students will reach out when they do have questions.
I'll add two here that we actually just on Friday sent kind of confirmation to students who had been paired with a mentor that, hey, you've been paired. Here's your mentor information. Here's some, we sent them a template to make an initial introduction. So that's something we sent last Friday. We will send a couple other times over the next few months. So hopefully that helps as well to kind of get them bouncing back to you.
I think those were all of our commonly asked questions. We did have a few unique ones. And if you run into a question that seems unique to your situation, please shoot either myself or Tyler an email. Give us a call. We'd be happy to answer any of those questions for you.
Yeah, it's particular. I know a lot of times during these webinars, it can be kind of rapid fire. So if for any reason we didn't get to your question or anything like that, my contact information is up. So shoot me an email. We'll get that taken care of. But if that's all the questions we have, I'll say one more time, thank you so much for volunteering. Thank you for participating in today's webinar. And I'll stress my contact information is here. So if you got a question afterwards, if you think of something in a couple of days, give me a call, let me know, and we'll get that taken care of. But really appreciate you for hopping on and for volunteering. And we hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday.